So bear with me as I read. I'm not really a scripted reader person. So I'm going to look over to my other screen for that. All right, so today, welcome to my second accelerated learning webinar. This is co-planning to meet the needs of students. And today we'll have some time to look at some scenarios. I would love for you to, in the chat, to share out, even though we are recording this for future participants, any challenges or any benefits and awesome things that you have found that have come out of co-planning, whether you are actively doing it as an instructor or whether you're supervising teachers who are co-planning. So those of you who don't know me, I am Steph Baxter. I'm on the training and consultation team. My initiative as a special ed consultant is inclusive practices, which I say all the time pretty much involves anything involving inclusion. So I love to talk about co-teaching, explicit instruction, universal design for learning, the zones of regulation, alternate eligible content, the PASA, all of those things kind of fall under my umbrella. So I call myself the octopus with the 8 tentacles going in all different directions. But it really is actually a really exciting initiative to be in because it does involve so many of my teammates' initiatives. I really get to see the big picture of how we support all students. So I am loving my role here on the tech team. So the IU13's Accelerated Learning Virtual Webinar Series, this all came about, it's a series of webinars that we are facilitating as IU13 so that we're able to provide responsive, high quality, and very focused professional learning experiences that are highlighting practical and actionable strategies to help accelerate learning. The most of the feedback that we've gotten with regards to professional development is we need something that you can give us in 15 or 20 minutes. Imagine how hard it would be to be able to provide what you would consider to be a nice chunk of content in 15 to 20 minutes. We've actually had requests for 15-minute PD, and that just blows my mind because I'm thinking we're not really getting past, the essential question or the learning goal and kind of doing the anticipatory set, right, from a lesson when, in 15 minutes it's already over. So the topics that we are presenting on in this accelerated learning series, this is part of the virtual professional learning series, and they were all developed with as a result of feedback and supports that were requested by IU13 school districts, and then also in combination with the evolving research and data that is specific to the pandemic recovery. So this is an initiative from Pennsylvania Department of Ed and then this statewide PAIU network expertise. So the accelerated learning components are as follows. So we have the high quality academics, and the purpose of that component is so that we can define those instructional changes that are needed to foster a culture of data-informed decision-making to ensure that every learner has access to the instructional strategies, materials, and the supports that they need in order to be able to successfully engage with the content and then master the grade level content as well. The second one is the supportive learning environment, and I think that one pretty much speaks for itself. But we are looking at how do we purposefully plan our instruction so that we are taking into consideration and anticipating the needs of all of our learners, and also ensuring that our learners are feeling safe in their environments and vulnerable to put themselves out there with regards to expressing what they understand and what they can show from their learning. Number 3 is the healthy systems condition. And the healthy systems component focuses on engaging a diverse group of stakeholders within our community, our education community, in order to gain a deeper understanding of the school system and to utilize that continuous improvement process and tools to address any systemic needs, which would it be involving staffing, technology, and scheduling, that is going to create the conditions that are necessary for accelerated learning. And then finally, we have the system of scaffolded supports. And this is the component that our team as TAC are focusing on. And this is providing that continuum of the evidence-based academic, behavioral, social, and emotional supports that are aligned with the student needs. So the last session that I did was all about scaffolding. So I'm going to show a little graphic. Oops. Actually, I'm not going to show that quite yet. Go in here and pull up that graphic because I believe I might have neglected to insert that graphic in this training, so I apologize for that. So let me go in and pull that up from my last one here. And then I will do a quick swap out here in a second with my screen share. All right. Perfect. Okay, let me just share this one slide here. So you can see this is hopefully you're seeing the accelerated learning system picture. Okay, so this is the whole graphic for the accelerated learning system. And you can see I added in my little arrow here to show that that is where this section of the webinars is occurring here at the system of scaffolded supports. And we have the other discs, I guess, or rings that you could call them. And these are each of those components. So this is the cycle of continuous improvement. So that improvement of the mindset, and then we're creating these opportunities as we see new needs pop up. We're thinking, what are some new tools and strategies that we can use to continually make adjustments and improvement to our delivery, and to also our supervision of teachers that are doing the delivery of this. And we can't leave out over here this other section of that academic achievement. We know that it is so tightly linked to the social emotional well-being. And the more I look at research regarding the effects of the pandemic, I've seen it with my own kids, maybe you've experienced the same. We're really seeing that need to be embedding and taking into consideration those social and emotional needs for our students, because we're dealing with something that just none of us have ever dealt with before. Thank you for being flexible with me switching over to that slide. I will go back now. And hopefully you should be seeing the next screen, which is the learning goal, which I am going to pop that link in here. I just made the copy of it right as we were signing on. So it'll be in there when you go to access that. So our learning goal for today, we're really going to look at identifying and learning to apply essential elements of lesson planning to meet the needs of all learners. And I've collected some different information. I really love to personalize my trainings, but it's really hard when you don't know until, maybe the day of who might be attending your trainings. So I'm hoping that you can take the content that's more general and apply it to the position that you're in. And hopefully we can have some robust discussion about how co-planning applies to you and what you can take away from this at the end of our time today. So for more information, you will be able, now that I've given you the link, to log on here at the IU13's Accelerated Learning website. There are lots of pages of information on the website. And I just know that for us, for the scaffolded supports, I can tell you, go to 52 and it'll get you right to those scaffolded supports. And then you don't have to tease through everything else for that. And a reminder, if you would like to receive Act 48 credit, make sure that you fill out the evaluation at the end of this session. I read all of the evaluations. In fact, I was just going back and looking at some scaffolding evaluations today. So please be honest on them, knowing that we have to create this in a very general format. Hopefully you can take something away from this, but I do read each and every evaluation. So I appreciate your completion of that in advance. All right, let's get down to it because time is precious and we don't have a lot of it, right? So let's talk about co-planning. So when you think of co-planning, I'm hoping that you think of something similar to what I have here. So we are going to be having our co-teachers discussing, developing plans together. I love the idea of common assessments. I was able to actually take part in something similar to that when I was an intervention specialist and really look at how can we analyze students' assessments across a grade level. That was my experience, not so much secondary, but the same could apply with a content area, looking and developing a common assessment that everyone agrees on that's most likely standards-based, and then being able to give those assessments a score. Obviously, if it's the format of the assessment is going to determine how that's scored. So if you're going to do a lot of open-ended or written expression, then obviously you would have to create some guidelines for that, probably a rubric on how all the people that are looking at that common assessment would agree to score that. We want to have both teachers be actively involved in the planning process. Their ideas need to be shared, maybe developing different drafts for feedback, sharing of resources, etc. I have seen too many instances where people say that they're co-teaching or co-planning, and that's really not what's going on. We see a lot of times, if it's a situation with a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher, oftentimes it's really challenging, and I don't fault teachers for this, especially when they are assessed on the performance of their students, of giving up control. Sometimes we don't see those gen ed teachers being able to give up the control. And then sometimes when the special ed teacher comes into play and they're supposed to be in that co-teaching marriage, we call it an arranged marriage. It's hard for them, depending on their personality, to advocate for themselves and say that, we want to be a part of this planning. We want to be a part of this actual instruction and not just pulling the kids that have the extra needs to the side table. That's not true co-teaching. We want to try to get away from the sage on the stage and the guide on the side. However, there is one model that pretty much lends itself to that. And I do have a slide. Again, this is not about co-teaching. This is about co-planning, but I did throw in a few things about co-teaching because I felt like they were really important points to make. Now, we know that the situation that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years, that time is precious and that we might not have time to sit in a classroom and physically co-plan together. The number one complaint that I get when I'm out on a consult or when I'm doing professional development is there is never enough time. So when I meet with secondary programs that are thinking about embarking on co-teaching, I look right to the admin in charge and I say, who's in charge of scheduling? Because if you work in secondary, you know that scheduling is an absolute nightmare, especially when students are transitioning between different classes and we've got block scheduling versus not block scheduling. Some kids that might need support periods are pulled for that. Thinking about when we have our life skills classes and we have students going out to gen ed for certain things, but they're going out with their respective grade level, which is inclusion. That's what we want, right? But then the scheduling can become so tricky. So what I've recommended to teams is that they start thinking smarter and working smarter, not harder. We have technology at our fingertips. Why not use it? So one example that I could give you is when I was a case manager and I had to collect a lot of information for present levels for an IEP, I would send out a Google Doc and I would clearly outline who was supposed to put their information where. I had people color coding their content. So when I do co-teaching trainings, I suggest Google Docs or some other form of planning. And it's easy then to make revisions or to throw something in at the last minute and for somebody to be able to pull that up. And that is an active, living, breathing document, right? So if a revision is made, just color code it and quickly date it, because we can't stress the communication enough. I feel like sometimes where the co-planning goes awry is when people don't feel informed, or one teacher might not know how to exactly meet Johnny's needs, or they're not sure what accommodations might need to be put in place. Or maybe a student is out sick and the teacher thinks that they're coming to take a test and that teacher doesn't know. So any type of document, or maybe it's just a quick email, communication is key for the collaboration to be effective. So again, use what works for you, but Google Docs is, most everybody has access to it, and it's a really easy way to make a quick revision. So let's do a little bit of building background here. So I'd love for you to populate the chat. We're also so small that if you don't mind unmuting, I'm totally great with that as well. And if this doesn't apply to you as a teacher, or if you don't currently do co-planning and co-teaching, you can give an answer that applies to someone you've supervised, or how you might view something if you were to co-plan. So let's look at question number 1. So this is kind of looking at a little bit of the prerequisite background that you all have with co-planning, and just to get our minds thinking about what would this look like in my environment, or for me as a supervisor of somebody that we want to start co-planning and maybe co-teaching together. So how do you currently plan for instruction with a partner? What would that look like? Would that be, I can throw out a couple answers. Would that be a face-to-face situation? Would that be you have a common planning time? Would that be we furiously email back and forth because we never see each other? So go ahead and unmute or put that in the chat just to get the conversation rolling.
Okay, I'll get it rolling.
Thank you, Pat. I knew you were good for that.
So I get to share a teaching space with another teacher, and we're just divided by a curtain, so we can do this face to face, and we're both done teaching at the same time. So it's easy for us.
Thank you. That is awesome. It's nice that you're both done at the same time. Now, let me ask you a question about that. When you're finished, because I used to share the same planning time as one of my second grade co-teachers as well, but I never felt like she had time for me. And it wasn't because she didn't want to make time for me. She was great to work with. We planned very well together, but she almost always felt like she had her other things she needed to do, whether it be housekeeping items for her classroom, that scholastic thing that had to get sent home, the kid that was absent that needs work to be sent home with a sibling. Do you ever experience that with your community ed dynamics? I'm thinking it might not be as problematic for you, but I could be totally wrong, because remember, I'm still just learning about community ed.
Yeah, the problem is more if someone is full-time and someone's part-time.
Okay.
So, it's like I have all afternoon. Someone else is like, I'm done at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock, or, I have half an hour before I'm done. So,
okay. So the timing can be an issue depending on if the teacher is part-time or full-time, you're saying?
Yeah. Like,
okay.
So yeah, I'm full-time, and the person I want to do some planning with is part-time.
Got you. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. And Deb, do you go by Deborah or Deb?
Deb is fine.
Okay.
So the planning I had been doing with a Lancaster teacher, and I'm sitting here in Lebanon, had to do with actually time of day as well, because my class was in the evening and her class was in the morning that we were trying. So we were divided by counties and kind of time of day as well.
So that could be a challenge. So you're making it work with, are you using Google Docs for your Lancaster planning right now since you're in Lebanon, or some other format?
The planning I'm doing now that I'm interested in getting more streamlined is through a group that we call family literacy. So family literacy, we have a team, and we, again, are across counties, and we have different components. We have different subjects that we teach, but a commonality we have is the parent instruction. So we are trying to get that, and we do meet by Zoom. It is a challenge because, like Brad said, if you have a part-time position, you may have a job at another time of the day somewhere else. So we do struggle with that. I feel like we're at a good place now with when we meet. We have a good meeting time, but we really want to make that count. We want to make that Thursday afternoon really structured. We really want to make it count. We don't want to jump in there and I mean, it's great to see everybody, but we really need to make it count, because in an hour and a half, everybody's going in a different direction.
Absolutely. I totally get that. In fact, like, that's how I feel sometimes with 1 hour PD. Like today, I have so much I want to share in such a limited time that I want to squeeze it in, but still have opportunities for discussion, because I think that's where you get the most out of your professional development, when you can have dialogue about it. And Becky, what's your role?
Hi, so I might be bringing something a little out of ordinary to this, but I'm a speech therapist. And I am currently servicing an elementary school K through 5.
Okay.
I've been a speech therapist for over 25 years, and way back when we used to do like co-teaching, like if a teacher had so many speech and language friends. So I would go do some lessons. Now I've been in a different sector for the longest time, or for the past couple of years, I guess. So I don't want to make any big changes now that I'm like establishing myself in this elementary school, but I'm getting thoughts about it because I think it just is so helpful. Co-planning, like language, and not even just like push in, but actual like co-teaching, especially like the kindergarten classrooms. So I'm not currently doing anything, but when I did, it was face-to-face, and usually before or after our, program took place. So.
Well, Becky, you might be shocked to hear this, but my first job at the IU13 was as an emergency certified speech therapist.
Oh.
They could not find people.
Yep, still can't.
No, and you know what? Asha didn't make that any easier, but you can't really work a full-time job. Maybe now you can, but back in 2002, you couldn't, and actually go back and get your degree. So I have 9 credits, but that's it. But you bring a really unique lens to this, and I totally agree with you. I was just having this conversation with a family member who was asking me about different supports for her daughter, and she has language processing disorder, and she's in private school. So really the needs that she has are nothing earth-shattering, out of the ordinary for a student, but then you have to think about the programming differently in private than you would maybe in public, because I feel like there's much more access and maybe more resources. With that being said, the private school is an amazing private school, but it's obviously not always legally bound by certain things.
Right.
So, and then you throw in executive functioning skills, and then you throw in ADHD and working memory needs. And I absolutely think that there is a significant place for speech therapists to be co-planning, because just considering the language alone, obviously you could be there to interpret any misarticulations, but you could really support, especially in those grade levels where the kids are still strengthening their language acquisition, how much of a resource you could be to those teachers in those classrooms to really help them plan in a Here we go, Brad, ready? Universally designed way. I had to say that because I did training with community ed about universal design for learning. So
Okay.
that is really looking at the planning process in a very proactive way, anticipating any barriers that could come up, and then addressing those prior so that those barriers are reduced or removed from the get-go. So kudos. This is awesome to have such a variety here. So the next one, as far as the critical elements of planning, we'll look at some guides that I have and some templates. I do have access to the Universal Design for Learning plan, which could be very beneficial, I think, because it adds in those principles that could be helpful as well. So I know that Brad already has it, but I'm happy to throw this on here too. Deb, do you have that one as well?
I do have the updated one, if it's the one that is scaled back incredibly.
Yeah, there's one from the understood.com. It's like the step-by-step planner. So I'll just pop it in the chat
Thank you.
in a little bit here, and you can see if that's the right one. So when you're thinking about the critical elements, the skeleton or whatever, what needs to be in that lesson plan? And you can just pop it in the chat, or you can unmute or whatever. What needs to be included there? We can't go anywhere without having an objective, right? So you might have your objective. Some people might call it an essential question. It could be the learning goal for the day. That is going to drive everything, right? So the question we want to ask ourselves is, what is the goal? What is the objective? What is the question that I need my students to be able to answer? What's something else that is a critical element of planning of your lesson plan? What's another critical element?
So right. You start with these objectives, or we start with CCRS standards and right. And a hook which activates prior knowledge.
Yep. So it could be the hook. It could be called the anticipatory set. And you're really assessing that background knowledge. You want to somehow tie it to the people's interests. And that'll also give you a good understanding of how you might have to tweak that lesson, right, as you go. Because depending on the prerequisite knowledge, you might have to take a step back. Obviously, materials. We're also going to be keeping in mind maybe different levels that you might have to use for the differentiation. And again, planning that proactively. How about the checking for the understanding? We have to be able to put that formative assessment in place, right? I was just doing a training for some middle school teachers, and I talk about this in explicit instruction as well, but we should be doing about 10 minutes of teaching and then about 2 minutes to assess our students. And then we can go and do 10 minutes again and about 2 minutes of doing that formative assessment. That chunking really helps our students. And what we know from their research is that students learn best at the beginning of a lesson and at the end of the lesson. So again, when you have that chunking and you have that 2 minute check in between, that's also going to help you adjust your teaching as you go. So I'm thinking if there's anything I missed. I used to remember OSMA, objectives, strategies, materials, assessment. That was the most basic bare bones. Anything else you put into it is going to be, the creative ways that you plan for your students. All right. And then how about limitations? Do you ever feel like you are an island or you're on your own? I've experienced that as an ES teacher, especially when my students weren't integrated as much as I would have liked. So just put in the chat, maybe one or two, or unmute. What would be some limitations of planning all by yourself? Yes, good. Thanks, Brad. Recreating the wheel or reinventing the wheel. Why not collaborate? Because somebody might have already created a lesson on what you're going to be teaching. Resources are limited, absolutely. I even think from a creativity or personality standpoint, everybody brings something to the instruction, right? Something different. I've been known to sing and dance when I do instruction. Now, again, I was more primary, so don't think I'm too crazy, but I would bring that energy and that excitement and that music and movement into my teaching. Whereas I worked with some teachers who were, one of them, you would have thought she was military trained. She was very much boom, boom, boom. And sometimes I had to watch my volume in her room when I was in there co-teaching with her to make sure I didn't get too super excited about the content, because it could kind of throw her off. It wasn't that she was, upset that I was energized and wanted to add my spin to things. It's because it would throw her off and then she'd get distracted from what she needed to be doing. I also think that relationships with students, sometimes it's really beneficial to have that co-planning, because one teacher might understand better how a student ticks, or they might know exactly what those accommodations are and how to best meet their needs, or be able to explain to someone else, you know what, I tried this strategy the other day with this student and this backfired. So don't do that, but let's try this today. So I think that's another advantage to co-planning. All right. Thanks so much for the participation. So I did throw a couple co-teaching slides in, as I mentioned. So let's just look at the rationale. If you are going to be doing co-planning in a co-teaching way, these are some reasons why we like to use co-teaching. And again, I think that some schools or teachers might say they're doing co-teaching, but I think what happens sometimes is we get so bogged down with all of our responsibilities, we don't have the time to co-plan, and then it really isn't what co-teaching is supposed to look like. But I feel like everybody is just doing the best they can do with what they've got any given day, especially during these times. So reducing the stigma. When we're truly co-teaching, students shouldn't know, if you're doing a gen ed and a special ed, they shouldn't know who the special ed teacher is. Now, obviously, some students are going to know who might pull kids out and everything, but there shouldn't be a difference in that classroom when that co-teaching is going on. Both teachers should look equal. It's going to be inclusive of all students as well, because either adult in the room could help any of the students. It actually helps improve instruction because we know we have our own specific areas of expertise. So for some co-teachers that go into secondary rooms where they're teaching about social studies or physics or like calculus or something like that, the gen ed teacher is typically going to be the one that's the expert in that content, right? So then the special ed teacher who could go in and co-teach would be the expert in how to make the content accessible for all students, or what accommodations might need to be made, or how assessments may need to be structured so that all students can access the content and then also show their learning in a way that works for them. It also allows for that fragmentation of the instruction to be minimized, because we're not doing that, oh, you go here or you get pulled out here. The students are still getting that exposure of that promised core curriculum, and they're able to stay in there with their general education peers. Another benefit to that is that those students that are strong in that content are going to be able to model that for the students that might not be as strong. Additionally, they can benefit from that relationship building of being a peer support, and the benefit that the students who might be a little bit weaker in that content, they get to work with their peers. And we know that sometimes students respond better to peers, maybe with redirection and help with the content than they might with their teachers. So it's really a win-win for both. And then the rapport, there's that modeling of the relationship, if the communication and the collaboration is truly there between the co-teaching team, students see that. And that's a great life skill for us to be modeling for our students, just how to get along and work with another adult and make it look seamless. Another advantage is that you can share the benefits and the great things that happen in the lesson. And then you have that other set of eyes to share the things that maybe didn't go well, that you can do that reflection and then change your lesson for the next day. So I wanted to show you some of the models. And again, we don't have time to go into all of these today because this isn't strictly about co-teaching, but there are different formats and delivery models. The one that I mentioned right here, the one teach, one support, that's more of like the one that doesn't really give us, I think, the most bang for our buck when it comes to co-teaching. That's the whole guide on the side, sage on the stage. The team teaching is more of that, you're not going to know who is who, everybody's helping. The speaking and adding, one might speak, and then, you know, when you have that good rapport with your, like a really close friend, and you could almost finish each other's sentences. That's kind of what that one is like. The speaking and the charting is a really great model as well, because one person is doing the speaking and then the other person is providing that visual model for the students, or maybe helping with those notes on the board for those students who really benefit from the guided notes or need that scaffolding. And then the complementary portions is just exactly what it says. It's splitting the instruction up into equal portions. And then the dividing class model is going to have the parallel, the alternative, the station. The station teaching could still be kind of even with the rotations, as long as all the students are getting each of the adults who are presenting that instruction. And that could look like either targeted support, which would look a little bit not equal for the students, but as far as like who's doing what instruction. Targeted support, you might have maybe what we call a tier 2 light or a pre-teach reteach station, where some kids are either getting front loading or they're getting reteaching. So that one isn't going to be as much of both teachers up teaching to everybody. The fluid support would be everybody, both teachers moving throughout the classroom and providing that support to all students. So I would love to be able to go into those in more depth, but maybe you could attend a co-teaching training and I'll be able to go over those in more detail. So some of the things that we want to talk about when we are co-planning are as follows. You've got to know what's obviously the content that you're going to be teaching, and then what are the expectations. So if you are going to differentiate this because you're going to plan this in a universally designed way, you're going to want to outline here's the goal, and then what must the students be able to show me? And that's obviously derived from that learning goal. But then will there be different expectations depending on the student? Maybe some students need to show you 25 problems. Maybe another student who has a lot of attention deficits or deficits in the area of attention might be able to show you proficiency with fewer problems. So you've got to have those discussions about what are the expectations going to be for all the students. With regards to planning, you need to talk about how much time do we have as our partners, and how are we going to do it? Is it going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be virtual over Zoom? Is it going to be via Google Doc? And who will be responsible for which part? Then you want to think about the instructional format. So like that graphic on the slide that I just showed you, who will be teaching what? Will one of us be doing the majority of it this day, but then tomorrow it'll be flip-flopped? I think of it as kind of like looking at a week at a glance, if possible. And of course, you will have to make some adjustments and changes depending on what your students mastered the day before. But you want to be able to break up and know ahead of time who's going to be doing what part of instructional delivery. And then that parity is just that that equality of the roles of the adults. So how clear is it going to be that the educators have the same status in the classroom? You know how it is when kids go to mom or dad. Well, mom said I couldn't do it, so I'm going to go to dad and see if I can get away with it from you. You both have to have the same you have to both establish yourselves as equals in the classroom so that students know you go to Mr. Weaver, you're going to get the same as if you go to Miss Blasey or Miss Smith, right? And then space related to students and teachers. Is there a space for that co-teacher if they're coming into your classroom for them to work, for them to be able to organize their stuff? And then for all the students in the classroom, is everything going to be accessible with regards to students being able to change from one teacher to the other? Or if you're breaking into two, if the large group is breaking into two smaller groups, what are the logistics of the environment going to be? Noise and each educator's tolerance. Can't stress this one enough. I am loud. My voice is low. It carries. I shut my door when I teach, not because I don't want people coming in, because as a special ed teacher, my door has always been a revolving door. Anybody could come in at any given time. I don't care. Come in, the more the merrier. But I'm loud. And some people don't like it. So make sure you talk about that. Instructional routines. Where's homework going to get handed in? What is the tolerance for due dates on things? Organizational routines. A type A person is going to have a hard time planning with a type B person. So you got to make that a healthy marriage, because co-teaching relationships can sometimes get separated or end up in divorce. And that's just the reality of it. Also, the definition of help. When a student says, I need help, we need to all be on the same page with that. Maybe having some kind of visual for students to say, I think I'm okay, but check in with me a little later, or I'm good to go. I don't need you to ask me if I'm doing okay. And then the red flags on the desk. I am totally lost. I have no idea what I'm doing. That can apply from a student perspective. From a teacher perspective, when you're co-planning, you want to make sure, again, that there's that parity. Sometimes what I've heard when I've done these trainings is that if it's a special ed gen ed situation, the special ed teachers aren't doing any of the grading. And I find that really not disturbing, but sort of troubling, because how are they to know then if their instruction that they provided, if they did have an equal part in providing that delivery, they should also be looking at that assessment to see if the questions that they would have addressed or the content that they taught, how did the students do with that? How can they know how to change their delivery and their practice of instruction if they have no idea, or they're not responsible for part of the grading? Like, that just blows my mind. And I know that a lot of times the teachers say, oh, I'll just take care of it. It's just easier for me to enter it. Sometimes also what happens is the other teacher doesn't have access to the student's grade book, so then they can't enter the stuff. So then it's almost like a management thing. Well, it's just easier for me to do it because I can enter it right in the grade book. So again, a system for that, I would suggest either getting that other teacher access to the grade book, or using something like an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc, or something that's easy for communication. And I've heard that people that don't have access use Google. And then the discipline procedures. We can't have loosey-goosey and the chief or the sergeant over here. That really clashes. So you've got to come to some non-negotiables, or there's a form that's a part of that packet that I put in the chat that says, this is what I expect from my co-teacher. These are my non-negotiables. This is where I draw the line. Like, my level of tolerance ends here. As a former emotional support teacher, you could imagine that my level of tolerance is higher than it would be for the average teacher, because I've dealt with a lot of significant behaviors. Again, I haven't tolerated it to the level of disturbing 25 plus students, but I do have a different level of tolerance. So that's a conversation you need to have. There are a bunch more here. So let me just go into my next. Sorry, I'm just getting my other TV screen up here. Safety matters. Again, these are just a lot of logistics of the classroom, but where are we exiting? How are we dealing with lockdowns, what have you? That one's self-explanatory. Feedback. How are each of you giving feedback to the students? And how are you going to discuss any either instructional issues, management with regards to behavior, or even issues with planning. What if your co-teacher isn't pulling his or her weight? How are you going to address that? Try to deal with that up front so that it's no shock when you start addressing that with your co-teacher. We talked about evaluating students. We talked about grading, getting materials prepared. How are you going to handle that? The duplication of any copies that need to be made, and then preparing any other materials. Responsibilities and procedures for substitutes. So if one of you is going to be out, how's that going to be handled? Does one person just take over for the teaching period because you co-planned anyway, so you should know what to do? And then we have that substitute do the best that he or she can. Confidentiality is also very important, especially if you're dealing with any students who are identified as special education, that those special education documents are legal and confidential. So you need to keep that in mind as well. And then any pet peeves that you have, anything that you can't deal with. And again, that's on that what I need from my co-teacher sheet that I shared with you. I'm going to stop and just pause. Any reflection or any questions so far about kind of getting started? And of course, it's already 4:22 and I have like 8 minutes to get through the rest of my stuff. The slides at the beginning, which are not mine, they're a part of AL, the accelerated learning, take a little bit of time to get through. So I am happy to hang on longer but again, I want to respect your time. I don't want to take up any of your additional time.
And you've mentioned Sage on the Stage guide on the side twice, and I wasn't quite sure, is this, I mean, I know what it means, but is this something that you want to avoid or encourage, or how does it fit in with this?
It's not my favorite model. Sometimes there are, and in the co-teaching training that I have, it does outline some reasons why you might use that. But I just feel like for the majority of co-teaching situations that students get more when both teachers are involved in the instruction, the assessment, and they almost do it seamlessly. And they're not looking like one has more of a role than the other. And that's kind of the one teaches, the one supports. It's almost like if you have a para pushing into your classroom and you're doing the teaching, and then you're just telling the para everything that needs to be done, or giving that para lesson plan and saying, okay, now go do this. So there are situations, and I could actually send out a couple of the slides that, if you're interested, Brad, that go over the different models in more detail. I'm happy to send them to you via email, or I can send it out to all three of you if you're interested, because it'll give rationale for when each of the models are helpful. But I don't feel like, especially in the situations I've been in, I'm a certified teacher too. A lot of times I ended up being that guide on the side, or the lady that pulled the kids who were English learners to the back table, like I kind of talked about in our UDL stuff, where I made the accommodations for the spelling instruction with the visual supports. And I had the kids reading aloud to me in a very small group. And then I went over all the visual supports with them word by word. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to really instruct. Now I did pinch hit when the teacher was out. That's the way the teacher wanted to run it. I wasn't necessarily a true co-teacher. I was an intervention specialist. So what we were doing wasn't true co-teaching. I wish it could have been more like that, but my schedule and when I was able to support didn't really allow for that. And in that situation, it was best for me to just pull the kids to the back table. But there are a rationale for all of the models and when they fit best or work best. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the protocols of co-planning, there are a couple different levels here. So we've got the safety in numbers, and that's when we're exploring and hoping to adopt this. We've got our teams of those people that are going to be in charge, and they're going to do that initiation of this process to come together to get the co-planning started. There's the building readiness phase where that's the adoption. So these teams meet together for discussion, and there's some sharing, but there's really nothing structured about it. And you'll hear a little bit more about the structure in the remaining time that we have. And then there's that out of the gate. That's going to be that initial implementation. This kind of reminded me when I was creating this training, sort of reminded me a little bit of what I'm doing for a PLC. You establish the norms. So we've got these group norms within our co-planning team. And this isn't just like partners, it could be 5, 6 people. They're already established. Team members have already been working together, looking at the data. They've been participating and collaborating for a while now. So this is a team that's in the phase where they're already looking at samples of student data and work, and they're doing the analysis of that and determining how to take the instruction from there. Lost my mouse there for a minute. So I have these slides, and I'm not going to read these out loud to you just because of the time, but this is going to further define each of these, each of the levels or the stages that I just went over here. So I'll let you look at those on your own. And then some questions under each of these phases. I have this as well. So, I got to change this one. So what's a significant change you made that you incorporated into your planning? Then share that with the group, ask clarifying questions, and have that reflective dialogue. And then reflection about any new insights. So when you're meeting with this group of teachers or this other teacher, what are some new insights that you gained from that? And then identify any effective components that were used or discovered as a part of the planning process. That second level of that building readiness, where we're adopting the co-planning, we have these this critical friends group, and they're going to look at these 4 items here. So the one thing that I want to highlight here is the key question. Do all students have access to the core curriculum through the activity? Does that assessment indicate that all student groups are meeting the learning target? And then what new instructional practices can we adopt to help particular student groups accelerate? So if you're going to focus on anything within that building readiness, I would say focus on those questions, the key questions there. And then we take that a little further with looking at having these statements here. We looked at the pieces of work. We then reflected on the standards that we had chosen for this lesson. We're evaluating those competencies. So what did the students know? What should they be able to understand? And then what do they understand, and what are they able to do? And then what they discovered about the quality of the learning, like, okay, the students got it a little bit. No, they really mastered that. They're proficient. All of these types of discussions you're going to be having with your collaborating team members. And then the out of the gate is going to really be focused on, remember, this is the team that's already together. We're going to analyze the group norms and then plan for one area of instruction as a team. So maybe you'll focus on reading, maybe you'll focus on math, maybe you'll focus on social studies or science. And then that planning should be reflective of the curriculum, and then that pacing guide, if you're lucky enough to have a pacing guide for your curriculum. And then additionally, we want to add in that differentiation and the adaptation based on the needs of your students, and then also looking at any students that might have IEPs and where you go with that as well. And there is a chart here that I have in here for the different cycle days. Now I know that in different environments, it wouldn't be cycle days, especially with the adult learners. It might be the numbers, it might be A, B, C, D. You're going to look at the pacing guide reference, what the learning target is, how you're going to do your formative assessments, and then look at the different tasks within and what you will expect your students who are currently performing below proficient to do, proficient, and then advanced. And again, always with keeping in mind, presuming competency. We must presume competency, because if we don't, well, presuming competency is the least dangerous assumption, because without presuming that students are competent, we may never know what they've been able to achieve. And I am so sorry that we have to go through this so quickly. And I don't even have a minute left, do I? I want 1 minute over. how are you three with time? Must you all get off right now? Do I have 5 minutes?
I have about 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, awesome. I apologize. Those slides in the beginning take a while. Okay, so then you're going to look at the reflections and you're going to address the student work, look about what you've discovered about the quality of the work, what you've discovered about the quality of the instruction, and then you're going to take that information to kind of drive your collaborative planning from there on out. And then if you need to reach out to any other people to join your planning group, such as Becky, this would be a great, like if you had a, let's say, first grade teaching team that was planning together, they might have a bunch of students who are really struggling with those language needs. And then that might be where they pull an expert like you in to address the language needs. And how could we tweak this or design our instruction differently to help those students as well. So with that planning approach, you want to look at the what, the how, and the who, because this maximizes our planning time and then supports, the universally designed and that differentiated lesson for an inclusive classroom. I wish we had time for my chat alert, but we kind of already answered part of it. How is what we do together substantially better for students than what one of us would do alone? Maybe you can just throw that answer into your My Learning Plan or your frontline evaluation as one of your takeaways. So just do that for me because that'll save us time and then you don't have to put that in the chat now. So the co-planning basics, we talked about the one thing, the couple of these, the one thing we didn't talk about is to have an agenda. That's important. Just like with a professional learning community, remember I told you I found some similarities. Have that agenda so that it keeps you responsible for being on time, which I'm not doing a good job at right now. Determining the roles and responsibilities of all the players involved. And then anybody who might need to alert any outside help, who's going to be responsible for reaching out to those people. Typically it was me because I was the one that was most in touch with any other specialist as a case manager and as a special ed teacher. Divide and conquer. Do not let yourself do all the work. That is not how this works. Okay. Keep your list. It could be a Google Doc of running concerns. You know, I really see this kid keeps bombing this assessment. What can we do differently? Typically when a student isn't doing well, you know, if they're actually completing it, it's because we need to change something in our instruction. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow. I had someone write that in an eval when I said it at a training. I did PD. Well, what about accountability for the students? Yes, of course, they need to make an effort and complete the assignment. But if they turn something in, or even if they didn't, maybe they're not engaged enough. Maybe we need to engage them better. It always needs to come back because there's always something we can be do to, including, you know, those are in administration, those who are consultants like I am, there's always something we can be doing to improve our practice. And that's why I read all the evals. Document the planning, save it for future reference. So just really quickly in my last 2 minutes, the what refers to the standard that the lesson addresses, which you already told me you have. We talked about the objective. What's the time frame to be able to teach that objective and those standards, and then the big ideas and the essential questions for the lesson. That's pretty easy peasy. The how is, and this is important, especially for people that feel a little weak in certain content areas. I remember told Brad, I can't get up and co-teach history. I'd have to study it first, right? How comfortable are you with the content? What co-teaching approach are you using? And again, I will try to take some of those slides and just throw them into another Google slide for you and email them to you so you can see those in a little bit more of a defined way. What's most effective for the middle of the lesson I missed the beginning here. At the beginning of the lesson, what approach is beneficial for the middle and then for the end? You don't have to have the same approach for the entire lesson. You can change it up based on the content and what going to work best for your students. And then based on the co-teaching approaches you selected, who's responsible for what? And then finally, the who is going to be focused on who might struggle behaviorally, socially, or academically, who needs accommodations or modifications, what types of differentiation strategies should I put in place? And then who else may be included in helping make the lesson accessible? And we talked about that. So unfortunately, because I went over, we don't have time for any of the scenarios. But what I would love for you to do is to just look at some of these are examples of where co-planning happened and some of them aren't. So maybe you'll have a chance to look at these scenarios that I have in here for you, and maybe just send me something in the eval and just say scenario 1. Maybe just pick one of them and say, in scenario 1, or you can email it to me, whatever's easiest. This didn't seem like the best form of co-planning to me because blank, or they could have done this better, or wow, this was a great example of co-planning strictly based on the information that Steph gave me in 50 minutes today. That would be awesome. And I do have a couple other references that I think I still need to add to this slide. So I will pop those in. And since it's a Google Doc, you'll have access to that current copy of that. So there are 4 scenarios there. Whoopsie. Okay. I clicked on the link. This is my email. Again, I'm happy to email. If you just want to pop all 3 of your emails, I'll save the chat in here. If you want the copy of that extra co-teaching info, put your email in the chat for me. And these are the links to the PDE accelerated learning resources that I'm to share. And I appreciate your patience with me and me going a little after. 1 hour just really isn't enough to do co-planning justice. I could talk on and on about it, but please email me with anything else and I will get you that additional information. And then just let me know what you thought about the scenarios and any final questions or comments. Was this too much information or just not enough time?
So in that extra information is going to be those models, right?
Yes, I'm going to go into my co-teaching training that I have and then email you. I think I have like disclaimers or rationale for when to use each of those.
Okay.
And I'm happy if Mary Edith wants to do some kind of co-teaching training, I'm happy to provide that to you as well. So I'm going to stop the recording now.